Welcome and thank you for joining us for this breakout session on the last day of EdPalooza. It is titled Using Social and Emotional Learning, or SEL, for a Successful Learning Environment. I am Kaitlin Kizer, and I am the Program Partnership Manager at Frameworks of Tampa Bay, a nonprofit organization located in Tampa, Florida. We are both very excited that you joined us today, and we're excited to share this information with you and also to collaborate together within this virtual setting. So before we get fully started, a little bit of housekeeping. In just a moment, I'll introduce our co-facilitator of this session, but we will all be interacting together using the chat feature as well as the poll feature. So there will be opportunities for you to share not only your thoughts and your feelings and your experiences, but really for you to feel SEL in the way that our educators and our students do in the classroom. So as participants, you all bring a variety of roles and skills and experiences with you, and we're excited to hear from you and learn with you, and to provide this information about SEL in different types of learning environments. So it is important here to note that the term learning environment is not limited to just the classroom or school setting. It can include any environment where children and teens are learning academically, socially, and emotionally. That could also include out-of-school time programs, extracurricular activities in our homes and within our communities. So we are ready to get started. We're going to dive in, but first, a little bit here about Frameworks of Tampa Bay. So we are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to empower educators, guardians, and other youth-serving organizations with training, coaching, and research-based resources to equip students of all ages with social and emotional skills. How is this accomplished? Through social and emotional learning, or what we will call SEL for this session. We teach a core set of social and emotional attitudes, values, and skills that will help our children, teens, and our adults to more effectively handle all of the life challenges and to be successful academically, socially, and emotionally, and in their professional environments as well. In short, we teach our youth and adults to manage their emotions so their emotions don't manage them. So next, we are going to be looking at who is with us this session. And I welcome you all for being here. If you've just joined us, my name is Kaitlin Kizer. I'm our Program Partnership Manager here at Frameworks of Tampa Bay. And I'm a former ESC teacher, or Exceptional Student Education teacher, primarily teaching students in the elementary grades that present with developmental and communication disabilities, emotional behavior disorders, as well as traumatic experiences that impact their overall development. I currently oversee K-12 programming at our nonprofit, where we partner with public, private, and charter schools in the Tampa Bay area. Our second speaker is Dr. Shea Quraishi, and I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Thank you, Katie. Hello, I'm delighted to be with you here today and truly want to thank and commend ExcelinEd for prioritizing SEL as part of these sessions. I am a former elementary school teacher and teacher mentor, having taught in Title I schools in New York, California, Tennessee, and Florida. Most of those happened to be charter schools. And in earning my doctorate in educational leadership and policy, my research focus was on how teachers make sense of SEL. So at Frameworks, I am privileged to oversee data, product development, and research. And I'm also mom to a toddler daughter, so I enjoy supporting parents and families as well, and supporting that family-school connection that we'll dive into today. So with that, I'll hand it back to Katie to get us started. Thank you, Katie.
Of course. Well, thank you for being here. And today, as we all interact as a whole group, we're going to be focusing on that social and emotional learning. Shea will share with us the importance of SEL as a preventative approach and how using that data can identify areas of need before challenges arise for our students. So our objectives for today for this session will include defining social and emotional learning to start. We'll then explore the importance of SEL in classrooms and schools, with families and caregivers, and within our community. And we'll wrap up with discussing some strategies for using SEL for a successful learning environment. And you might have read in this session that the description shared, it's a workshop style, meaning that it'll be interactive. And I encourage you to utilize that chat feature as we go along to share with us your experiences as well. But before we do that, I'm going to like to start with hearing from you all first. It's our first time using our poll here, and it will pop up on your screen. But to get a better idea of who's attending our session, please share with us your current role by selecting which option or options that apply to you. So the options here, of course, are going to include policymaker or practitioner, educator and administrator, parent and guardian, or student and other. So if you'll go ahead and share with us what your role is, we can better see who is here with us today. We'll give just another minute before those. We end the poll and we can see who is here. All right. Wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and end that and we can see who is with us. But it appears that we have mostly our educators and administrators, as well as those who have selected the other role. Some parents and guardians, and maybe you're one of both, of educator and a parent, as well as some students. So I'm excited that you've all joined us, and that is helpful for us to know. By getting a better idea of who's on the session with us, we can better drive instruction, and that's what we talk a lot about with our teachers as well. But I do think we need to go a little bit further, so we're going to head over to the chat feature. 1 second here, we'll head back to our slides. And how are you feeling this afternoon? Checking in to see how you're doing, not just what your role is going to be important as well. Using the chat feature, if you'll check in using one emotion word that describes how you're currently feeling this afternoon. Of course, this is to your own comfort level, and the session is supportive and inclusive of all emotions. So I'll leave that up to you. I'll start with one word while you're getting ready, but I'm feeling very energized and excited this afternoon. So I'll go over here and see how you all are doing. All right. Excited, hopeful, says Cynthia. Inspired, says Lily. Awesome. Some very comfortable emotions. Awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing that. I'll let those continue to come in here. I saw one come in that says comfortable. Great. Those are comfortable feelings. And I appreciate you all for sharing. I noticed that we did have some more comfortable emotions, but it's not unlike or not uncommon for folks to maybe feel tired or perhaps distracted this time of day in the afternoon. All feelings are normal. They're just feelings. So our session is titled Using Social and Emotional Learning for a Successful Learning Environment. And this type of emotional check-in is a fantastic strategy for creating that successful work environment or educational environment. Our emotions drive everything, and they dictate how we can interact with others, how our instruction is delivered if we're educators, and how our students are able to connect with their peers. So an emotional check-in tells me as the educator that we're ready to either move forward or maybe we need to hit pause and take a moment to regroup. But given all the comfortable emotions that were shared here, I think we're ready to move forward. So we'll dive into this topic a little bit more and discover why the approach to the foundational skills and needs of our students is proactive and preventative, and how it allows for our students not only to be successful, but for adults too. So educators, administrators, parents and guardians, and those of you who selected other as your role. So our first objective today will be defining what is social and emotional learning so that we're all on the same page. And to talk about how we can be purposeful in building our students' social and emotional skills through academic content, we'll first need to take a moment and calibrate on that definition of social and emotional learning, or SEL. And this is provided to us by the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, or CASEL. So I'm going to pop that definition up here on your screen. And there's 2 slides for this because it is very lengthy, but it's very important that we review this first. So CASEL is the national organization that drives SEL-related research and practice. And they've recently updated their definition to clearly outline the role of social emotional learning in promoting equity in education. So the definition emphasizes student agency while also acknowledging that the context and environment in which students' lives can't be dissociated from their academic, social, and emotional development. So today, let's look at this first slide here to unpack that meaning together. So I'll read it for us, and you can follow along on your screen. But social and emotional learning is an integral part of education and human development. SEL is a process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes in order to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make caring and responsible decisions. We're going to go down to our next slide that also looks at the second part of our definition here. And this offers a more holistic view of where, how, and why SEL occurs. So this includes areas like family engagement and adult SEL, social injustice, cultural competence, curriculum and instruction, that continuous learning and continuous improvement, and equity. So it makes it clear how all of these are connected. Social and emotional learning, or SEL, advances educational equity and excellence through authentic school, family, community partnerships to establish learning environments and experiences that feature trusting and collaborative relationships, rigorous and meaningful curriculum and instruction, and ongoing evaluation. SEL can help address various forms of inequity and empower our young people and adults to co-create thriving schools and contribute to safe, healthy, and just communities. So this is a lot. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of lengthy definition, but what resonates with you when you hear and see these two slides together in terms of SEL? If you would go to the chat, we love to ask our participants and our teachers when we're working with them, what words stick out to you? We've highlighted and bolded a few here, but I'm going to go ahead to our chat and see what resonates with you all. All right. Give me 1 second. If there's anything with you that you feel like might stand out in our definition, I know for me that last sentence that says co-create thriving schools, I love the idea that we're doing this together with our scholars and with our families and with those around us in our community. So hopefully you're taking some notes and reflecting on yours as well. All right. Empowering young people. Thank you, Allison. Wonderful. Definitely that word empower can be very empowering in itself. All right. So we are going to move into our competencies here, and you'll see that on your screen. But there are 5 core competency areas and skills that help to form a framework for our young people's success, not only in school, but in their adult lives as their community members, business leaders, or productive workers and parents. They're shown here on our screen, and they include self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So as an educator, these are the skills I want my students to have so we can get to that academic instruction, right? But it's important to note that these competencies are not all linear. So it's not as if we've taught one skill area and we can check off that box. There are skills that require our long-term practice. So we as adults are still practicing these things. It's also important to note that this skill development looks different, and depending on a child's developmental age and their personal history, self-awareness might look different for a 5th grader than per se an 8th grader or a high schooler, but it can also look quite different between that same grade level. So within all of our 5th graders, looking at self-awareness will look different. What we expect in terms of social awareness also might differ across stages, but all of these 5 competencies, it's important to keep in mind that when we reinforce at each stage, new layers of complexity are added, and that can help our students to continue to grow. So our time together today really will look at and help us to demystify SEL. Great educators and parents and community members like all of us on this session are already doing a lot of these SEL strategies, but the goal is to make it intentional and purposeful and strategic, and make it not just a standalone lesson or curriculum, but how can we interact as a community and a society in general? We'll dive deeper into these competency areas, and we'll look at what that can look like for all of our students. So our first one here, whoops, let me go back there, is self-awareness. So I'll admit that we'll go through all 5 of these areas rather quickly, because then we can dive into why they're important and what strategies can look like. So I hope you'll follow along with me as we go through these 5 areas. But self-awareness is our first one. And self-awareness is the abilities to manage one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors effectively in different situations and to achieve goals and aspirations. So this includes the capacities to delay gratification and manage stress, and to feel motivation and agency to accomplish personal and collective goals. Knowing how an emotion feels and looks helps a student to better be able to recognize and then label that emotion. So for example, when we feel an emotion that's a little bit uncomfortable, but one like angry, we might know that our muscles tense up, right? And our heart continues to beat a little bit faster. But we're not born knowing those things about ourselves. We have to learn it and to practice recognizing it before we can manage it. And through SEL, we can build emotional vocabulary by talking about our emotions and starting with just normalizing angry is an emotion that everybody feels at some point. So at Frameworks, we talk about how emotions are not good or bad, but rather they're uncomfortable or comfortable. Good or bad, as emotions can be described, can sometimes make it feel like emotions shouldn't be happening, which can feel scary or shameful. But emotions are different from our behaviors, and those are the choices that we make. And sometimes it can be hard to make the right choice. And so we need to have that practice for our students to handle those stronger emotions. But with self-awareness, we know that our emotions can be mixed and vary in intensity, but they will lessen over time. Another tool we'll look at here for normalizing and labeling emotions is this emotional vocabulary wheel. This is a wonderful tool, and you will be able to locate it on our website, which we'll share at the end of the session. But it is crucial to model normalizing and naming different emotions as the adults that are advocating for our students. The key here is to build emotional vocabulary and help students feel safe talking about their emotions, which might not be something that they're used to. And even as adults, we might not be that comfortable at doing this yet. We can use this wheel here as a guiding tool for talking about emotions, and it's a great visual for understanding that we all experience many different emotions, but they're still just natural reactions to our life experiences. Just like when we reviewed how you all might be feeling at the beginning of the session today, it's also helpful to teach our students that we can build that emotional vocabulary to really determine what it is that we're feeling and how that's going to impact our day going forward. This doesn't just include those uncomfortable emotions, which we do tend to lean towards, maybe like frustration or anxiety, the ones that are present in our minds sometimes, but also those comfortable ones, like feeling very proud and feeling very accepted. So I really encourage us to utilize this tool in whatever learning environment that you're in. Our next competency area is self-management. So now that our students understand what their emotions are, it's what do they do with them? And that self-management includes the abilities to manage one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors effectively in different situations and to achieve their goals and aspirations. So this includes the capacities to delay gratification and manage stress. It looks at identifying our triggers and practicing our coping skills. We can do that through role playing with our students. So additionally, with our ability to model within the classroom, I might want to look at what are my triggers as the adult. And sometimes as the educator, kids will know our triggers better than we do, and that's okay. They're helping us to build our own self-management skills. So growth mindset also comes into play here because our students are learning and growing. The power of that word yet helps us to persevere when we don't know exactly how to do something or can't get the hang of it right away. And that includes knowing how to manage our emotions. We might not be able to practice that deep breathing yet on our own. And that's why we practice together. But since all of us are joining on this wonderful EdPalooza event this week, it's meaning that we're likely invested in supporting our students, and you're practicing those self-management skills as well. So you're modeling as adults. All right, we're moving into our third competency here, which is social awareness. So social awareness is the ability to understand the perspectives and empathize with others, including those from diverse backgrounds, cultures, and contexts. And this includes the capacities to feel compassion for others, understand broader historical and social norms for behaviors in different settings, and recognizing family, school, and community resources and supports that are available. Social awareness skills allow for us to take the perspective of others and demonstrate empathy for how they feel, which is a critical tool when we're talking about social and emotional skills. It often requires for us to understand nonverbal language and read physical cues in order to communicate effectively. It also allows for us to not only respect, but appreciate those that are different from us, skills that we know our students are going to need long beyond our classroom. All right, we're looking at our last two, and then I'm going to look to hear from you all in the chat here in just a moment. But looking at relationship skills, that is our bottom fourth competency area, and it includes the abilities to establish and maintain healthy and supportive relationships, and to effectively navigate different settings with diverse individuals and groups. This includes the capacities to communicate clearly, listen actively, cooperate, and work collaboratively in order to problem solve and negotiate conflict constructively, really challenging skills for our students sometimes. It also includes navigating settings with different social and cultural demands and opportunities, providing leadership, or seeking and offering help when needed. When we talk about relationship skills here with our students, we first start with listing how many different types of relationships do we have with others, and really examining what different types of skills are required for those relationships. Generally speaking, to maintain those healthy and supportive relationships that are mentioned in the definition, we need to be able to communicate clearly with others and to practice authentically listening to our peers and to our colleagues. For our students, this looks like solving peer conflicts without having the interference of an adult every single time, knowing who and when and how to ask for help, and also offering help to others and being able to resist that peer pressure when they get into the middle school and high school grades. So our last competency area, as we really dive into what is SEL, is responsible decision making. And this requires the use of all of the 4 skills that we just talked about. Responsible decision making is that last piece of the SEL pie, if you will. And it includes the abilities to make caring and constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions across, again, diverse situations. This includes the capacities to consider ethical standards and safety concerns, and to evaluate the benefits and the consequences of various actions for not only their personal, but their social and collective well-being. So this one can be difficult for students to know that they have options and that those options are needed in order to make choices that are positive and healthy and safe. A key skill in this area is understanding how our choices affect others, having that conversation with our students, both positively and negatively, the way that they affect others, and taking that time to reflect with them on the decisions and choices that they've made without judgment. So thinking about whether the choice was one that we would make again, maybe why or why not, and how those decisions impact our progress towards our goals, personally and collectively as a group. So before we move into our next section and really understand why is all of this so important, let's connect. Let's see, how can these social and emotional skills help students and adults be successful? And what do you all think so far? I have to pause over here to our chat, but if you'll go ahead and put that in the chat, why do you think these skills will help our students? Any of them coming in so far? All right. Builds confidence. Absolutely, it does. Helps our students to understand what they're capable of, and that starts sometimes with little increments. Other ideas? Let me scroll down here. Shea, you might be able to read that one for me. Could you go ahead and, what does it say?
Of course. So Cynthia shared, by managing emotions, they can focus on growth and learning. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because sometimes when those emotions are so present, it's hard to move through them in order to get to that content. Absolutely. One more. When calm and feeling safe, pulls to the frontal lobe and learning. Oh, thank you. Great. Well, I'm going to pass it to Shea in just a moment here, but I think we can see that there are many different ways in which social and emotional skills can help not only our students to thrive, we're going to find that happens for us as adults as well. So we're moving into our next objective, and Shea will explore how the importance of SEL in those variety of settings, including classrooms and schools, but also with our families and caregivers within the broader community context as well. So specifically, we'll look at the foundational aspects here in this section, specifically, how does it look in the year of 2020, because that's been very different for all of us. How does SEL relate to mental health? And also the impact of career and citizenship that SEL can have on our community. So Shea, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Katie. So this image of the SEL wheel that we just went through now includes the 4 gray bands on the exterior. And those bands, as outlined by Castle, note where SEL is important. So as Katie already mentioned, SEL does not just happen in the classroom, and it's not simply a 20-minute lesson and a box that we can check off. So let's talk about what that looks like. The innermost band, yes, is classrooms, and that means SEL is happening through both instruction or explicit lessons, for example, a lesson on self-management, but it's also through a focus on classroom climate. So that's important to note, that SEL skills can be taught explicitly, but they also have to be modeled and be part of building a climate of community, trust, and support in order for that instruction to be meaningful and to connect for students. Moving outward to the next band, you'll see that it's labeled schools. So that means school-wide culture, practices, and policies. The moment you walk into a school office, you should be able to observe SEL in action. It's how you feel when you walk down the hallways and through the cafeteria and even on the bus. And that next band, families and caregivers. Families and caregivers are important allies in the effort to cultivate social and emotional skills. So when there is respectful collaboration between school and home, students see that and they feel supported in their overall development, and research bears that out. And finally, the outermost band notes the role of community in building social and emotional skills through aligned learning opportunities. And that goes both ways. So it means schools are listening to community stakeholders, and community stakeholders are learning from schools and reinforcing what's being taught in schools and classrooms. So situating those 5 core competencies from the wheel in the broader landscape of what students and adults need to be successful is this building blocks for learning pyramid, which was put forth by the nonprofit organization Turnaround for Children. And here you can see some of that same language in those bottom 2 rows in teal, showing that the competencies of SEL really are foundational to all learning, including academic learning. Those elements have to be in place before a person is able to build some of those higher level competencies on the orange blocks. So if we jump in with a higher level skill, for example, telling our students or our children just to be resilient and push through, if we haven't taught those basic stress management skills, such as mindfulness breathing, then they don't have the tools for how to do that, which means we're simply talking at them and we'll end up getting frustrated and spinning our wheels. So it behooves all of us to think about this trajectory of skills and start with those foundational social and emotional skills so that students later on can build those skills that they need to be successful personally, academically, professionally. Here's the catch. Often kids come in, especially by the time they're at the high school level, and we assume that they have those foundational skills in place, whereas that's, of course, not always true. We even know adults who are still building and practicing those higher level skills. It's a lifelong practice. So at Frameworks, we often compare this to building a house. We cannot put on the pretty exterior and the curtains before the basic structure is built. So all of our programming focuses on thinking about developmentally appropriate skills and building those skills in a sequential manner. Now, Sarah mentioned in our chat the role of the brain in all of this, and that's key. So we just saw attachment at the bottom of that pyramid, and attachment is referring to safe relationships. And there's a brain basis for why we need relationships. So these brain scans that you see here shows that the part of our brains that senses danger is less active if we feel the support of a social network. So in other words, even in times of stress or perceived danger, we're able to stay calmer if we have relationships to lean on. This might ring a bell for the year 2020 and how we've navigated COVID. So in this case, looking at the image on the left, a person whose brain was being scanned was alone when they were presented with a threat, which was a small electrical shock in this study. And the brain scans show that the brain response to that anxiety and that stress of worrying about the next shock lit up that brain. Whereas on the right, the person being shocked was holding hands with someone important to them, with a friend. And what this shows is that their hypothalamus, which regulates their stress, was less activated simply because they had the support of a loved one holding their hand. So we all feel tired or overwhelmed sometimes. And what we can learn from this in terms of schools and classrooms is that the more we focus and dedicate time to building and maintaining relationships, the more supported students and educators and their families will feel. And they'll be better able to navigate the inevitable stressors in 2020 and beyond. And so really we're building that sense of safety and belonging that is foundational to academic success. Now here you see a hill. There was another study done where people at the bottom of the hill were asked to estimate how steep the incline was. And the people who were alone thought that it looked steeper. They perceived a tougher climb, whereas the people who stood at the base of the hill with a friend perceived less of a challenge. In other words, our relationships and our sense of being surrounded by support affects how we perceive and navigate stress. So I invite you to reflect here for a moment. Think if you've ever faced a metaphoric hill in front of you, a challenge. Did you lean on someone? Maybe let us know in the chat who you leaned on, who was there for you, who made you feel supported, whether they were physically by your side or just mentally. I know for one thing, in the year 2020, I've certainly leaned on my village. So in that year 2020, and we're almost through it, folks, we've been coping with really an unprecedented amount of stress. And no matter what that looked like for you or for the students you support, right? And Allison leaned on her colleagues, absolutely, right? We've all had to lean on someone, and we've had to grow beyond our comfort zone, perhaps experience some new uncomfortable emotions or new levels of uncomfortable emotions. And it can feel exhausting. It can take a toll on our physical wellness and on our mental wellness, which is all the more reason to highlight how relationships are key to keeping us connected and keeping us resilient. And that goes for both the adults in the room as well as for our students. So social and emotional learning helps us to do just that. Returning a bit to the brain, this time let's talk about how our brains grow when we prioritize SEL. When SEL is central in schools and communities, it physically changes the brain's wiring. And we call that neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to change over time and to create new neural pathways. So one of the key aspects of the brain that SEL targets is the fight or flight response, which is rooted in our amygdala. Our brains, from an evolutionary perspective, are wired to recognize certain stimuli like snakes. And in an evolutionary sense, it's good news that we have that wiring. We don't have time to make a pro-con list or to think about how to respond to the snake. We just know to run. However, in classrooms and schools, if that is our brain's go-to response and we immediately go into fight or flight mode in the presence of a perceived stressor, that can come across as a verbal argument, the flipping of a desk, the throwing of a book, unkind words, any of these undesirable behaviors that are actually rooted in the brain. So in other words, the amygdala can hijack us and hijack our students. And so we owe it to them to model and teach different reactions, to role play before those problems even arise, to name different strategies for navigating those challenges and give them constructive responses. And by doing that, we are building new synaptic connections in the brain or new ways of responding. And like anything else in the brain, the more times and the more often a student practices this, the easier it becomes for their brain to do, so that their brain is no longer in a constant state of stress and their brain learns a new go-to response to challenges. Now, it's very important to make this crucial distinction that SEL is about prevention and teaching skills, ideally before challenges ever arise. So through SEL, we're giving kids tools that they need to cope with challenging situations or uncomfortable feelings before those situations occur. That helps to build resilience. So in other words, SEL is not about putting out fires after those fires ignite. It's about teaching kids to cope with or even extinguish their own fires, or even preventing those fires in the first place. That said, we can't prevent all fires, all challenges. Adverse childhood experiences come into play here as well, and some external influences on our students. And so sometimes intervention is necessary, and that is the distinction between SEL at that tier 1 prevention level and mental health at the tier 2, tier 3 intervention levels. And so that's where our trained mental health professionals are so key, and why it's key for us all to recognize the signs of a serious mental health issue and to know when to refer a student to one of the trained professionals that you see listed here. Now, that said, from a prevention standpoint, we know that when we prioritize social and emotional wellness in the classroom, in the school, at home, and in the community, this can mitigate, this can even prevent some underlying mental health issues by giving students the support and skills that they need in order to cope. So let's take a look at why SEL is important at all of the levels that we mentioned in those gray bands. So whether it is through that teaching of an explicit curriculum or it's through building positive culture and climate, SEL isn't just warm and fuzzy, it actually pays off. And one result that we see consistently when SEL is approached with quality and fidelity is increased academic achievement. So in multiple studies, students who participated in SEL programming scored an average of 11 percentile points higher on math and language arts standardized testing compared to their peers. And you can see a number of other aspects that improve when we focus on SEL. So including graduation rates, including student sense of belonging, their mental health, reduced emotional distress, more skills to cope with challenges and push through them. They're less likely to take harmful risks. They're less likely to need to turn to more dangerous coping strategies, such as drugs and alcohol and substance use. As a result of all of that, incarceration rates are statistically lower for students who are given access to SEL. So this is really a whole presentation in itself, right? So many positive outcomes for SEL, but we owe it to our participants here to highlight those. Now, what you see here is an explanation of what has to be in place for those results to occur. This is the theory of action put forth by Castle. So there is a common misunderstanding that SEL is just a curriculum. It's 20 minutes a day, check off the box. While that's part of it, it has to be more. It has to be integrated and infused into everything that we do. So if I'm teaching a math lesson, I should be speaking to my kids in a way that reflects social and emotional skill building, for example. And only when all of these elements in the orange box are in place do we see the benefits in the blue and the pink boxes. And that means infusing SEL teaching practices, which we'll outline in a moment, infusing SEL into academics, which we focused on today, using organizational strategies, that's school-wide climate and culture, that support SEL, and teaching those freestanding SEL lessons. And so all of that has to be in place because each of those components reinforces the others. So for example, if I'm teaching students a lesson on stress management, then I need to model stress management throughout the day and give them authentic opportunities to apply that skill. And covering all of those areas makes it more likely that students will actually build those skills that they need to be successful. Oops. Sorry about that. In the long run, continuing in that direction toward the outer band on the wheel on communities, there is an impact on a student's career when they develop social and emotional skills, which leads to an increase in their emotional intelligence, or EQ, as opposed to IQ. So research shows that about 90% of top performers across fields have high emotional intelligence, or EQ. And that EQ accounts for about 58% of your job performance, whereas IQ only accounts for about 25%. So we've all met someone who's book smart, but maybe could work a little bit on their emotional intelligence. So we're building those skills ideally from an early age. People with high EQ also make about $29,000 more a year. There's a return on investment to society of various estimates, $11, $15. So really society benefits in the long run when we invest in social and emotional skills. And of course, all of these outcomes are outcomes that we want for our students. Now at the community level, when we look at SEL in the long run, we do see benefits in the form of positive citizenship. So as students develop social awareness, They're more likely to give back to their community through civic engagement and volunteerism. They're more likely to advocate for others. They're more likely to set collective goals that better their communities. One recent study of a 20-year program found that students who participated in SEL developed self-advocacy and self-control, and that led to increased civic engagement through long-term political participation, which means students were more likely to vote. They were more likely to recognize and address societal issues, and they were more likely to engage in their communities. So before we move into our final objective, I'd love to hear from you all. What are you already doing in your role, or perhaps multiple roles, to cultivate the skills on the wheel here? So let's share some examples. Maybe it's something you're doing at home with your family. Maybe it's something you're doing professionally in schools and classrooms. Perhaps it's something you're doing yourself. But what is one of these skills that you've been focusing on this year? For example, I know I've been focusing a little bit on self-management as we've had to navigate more and more stress. And how are you building that skill? Maybe it's building that skill for yourself, or building that skill for our children and students as well. Go ahead and share in the chat if anything comes to mind. So which of these skills have you really needed lately? And if you have a strategy alongside that skill, we'd love to hear it. This one can take a minute to reflect, so we'll give a little bit of time. I will say for self-management, it's been really helpful for me during the time of COVID to build in some routines that I didn't previously lean on before. So in a remote working environment, it was important for me to have a set time to have my coffee on the porch every morning, to have a set time where we sat down as a family and enjoyed dinner together every evening, and to keep some sense of structure in my day. Cynthia shared, facilitating and providing webinars for educators on integrating SEL core competencies into instruction has been key. Absolutely. So I will say, as a former classroom teacher, often we aren't taught about SEL in depth. And so when we have an SEL program shown to us, it can be a perfect SEL program, but at Frameworks, we like to say it's not so perfect if it ends up on the shelf. So often our educators thrive when they're given professional development and coaching so that we can really make sense of the SEL resources out there and integrate them in ways that don't necessarily even require more time. It's just a shift in our way of thinking. So thank you for sharing that, Cynthia. The great news, as Katie said, we're already doing a lot of this. It just serves us well to be more intentional and systematic about it. Thank you, Allison, for sharing that you go on a walk each evening and reflect on your day, things to do in the days ahead, to release stress and anxiety. Yes, so that reflection piece is key both for us as adults and for our students. So thank you for those wonderful ideas. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Katie to share some more effective ways to build SEL competencies.
Yes, and I'm going to lean on our chat for a moment because I love what Cami shared about helping her 8-year-old son with that responsible decision making. That's a hard one to do, especially at 8. But when we give that choice and that reflection time, we're likely to make those better choices the next time. So awesome job with that.
Awesome.
Oh, all right. We are going to move into our strategies section here in the last 15 or so minutes that we have. And these are already fantastic ones that you all have already shared. So we're going to look at some specifically that look at all of the 4 bands that Shea talked about with our homes and communities, classrooms, schools, and we will go from there. So our first one for SEL Everyday, or our strategies, can be used to getting to know our students on an individual level. And we can do this at home as well. Our learning environments, remember, aren't just in the classroom. It's wherever our students are learning and growing. And it's called the 10x2 strategy. So how this works is first choose a student, if you're in the classroom, to focus on building a better relationship with. It starts with having a 2-minute conversation with that student for 10 consecutive school days. So sticking with that structure of checking in with them. And as you can see here in this picture, it doesn't have to be a set time or place. It can be on the go, as long as you're connecting with them consistently. The conversation, though, what is key here is to be non-academic. Focus on that student's interests and thoughts and their feelings. As long as it's clear that they have your attention for 2 minutes, you're going to find that when you finish, your relationship is much stronger and deeper than it was when you started. After that period is over, you can finish and repeat the process with another student. But I love that we also share this with our educators. It's a great purposeful way to get to know your students, but also with your colleagues and with family members that are involved in students' education as well. So making that intentional time, like we talked about, to be aware of what skills are needed for the relationship and spending time to get there. Another strategy for SEL every day is to focus on self-awareness and self-management through mindfulness and breathing exercises. So really quick, if you already do something along the lines of mindful breathing, meditation, or practices within your environment, whatever that looks like, you would enter a 1 into the chat. Sometimes that helps us to see, is this something that people are already doing, or is it something that's totally new? I see they come in right quickly. Great. I love that those who choose SEL are oftentimes the ones that are doing a lot of the strategies already, which is great. And there's Brian. Brian is one of my teammates, and I know that he does a lot of great breathing strategies with our own team. So this is a wonderful tool that we can use, but I like what Shea said earlier. It's not using it only in the moment that we need it. It's practicing it so that when we need it in the moment, we're ready and familiar with that strategy. So it can be done anywhere, at any time, and it can be proven to help us in managing not only comfortable and uncomfortable emotions, but that time to process and understand, what decision am I going to make here to manage our emotion? So if something is bothering a student at recess, for example, or maybe from their morning at home and they're walking into our classroom, they're not in a space oftentimes to focus on that bell work for math. But if they're offered an opportunity to practice mindfulness and take a collective deep breath in together, focus on that breathing and learn how to calm down in the moment, they're better able to use those strategies as they're going throughout their whole day. Even doing this for 30 seconds or a minute to start a lesson or before a test even can be helpful for us. I love that we're getting some strategies and solutions in the chat as well. There's so many different types, and some can include movement. But a couple key things here is that we can do these before transitions to get ready. We can do them in preparation for our activities naturally to transition, and then also in the cool down strategy in the moment times. So if you, again, are using these, that's awesome. And if you are using them infrequently, that's okay. It's a great time to start. It's never too late. So let's look at another strategy for SEL every day. This one looks at prioritizing connections within the classroom or whatever that learning environment looks like. Maybe you're in and out of school time program, or maybe this is at home with multiple of your own children and family members. Either in person or virtual, it is important for us to include opportunities for our kids to connect, to really be kids and connect with their peers. And this goes a long way with that brain science and our human need to connect that Shea talked about earlier. So if we're able to do this in the classroom, it might look like including collaborative learning activities or facilitating a whole classroom group a conversation or some type of discussion that allows for everyone to have an equal opportunity to share. Making that time to teach those skills that are needed to have a respectful conversation even. We can empower students by giving them the voice and choice opportunities, as this creates that ownership of their own learning and their connections and progress towards their goals. So for parents and guardians who are working with their students at home to learn remotely, it's also important for us to identify those regular check-in times with other peers, because they're not in the classroom with their peers physically. So making that time to connect with kids and see how they're doing, maybe asking open-ended questions or inviting a dialogue about how things are going well and what are some areas that we want to focus on. And then connecting and seeing how is it going with their friends, making those opportunities for them to connect. It can set up those times during school hours if it's virtual, or maybe after school hours if there's an opportunity for everyone to connect. But it does look like reflecting together either as a class or as a family or as a community, a small group, to encourage that healthy and supportive learning environment. Our last strategy for SEL every day is a really important one to include. And we always struggle with, do we include this as the first strategy or is it the last one to wrap it up? But it is an important one to acknowledge since we're all adults here advocating for SEL. And it looks like taking care of ourselves as adults in order to support our students. So we've likely seen this image on the left before when we're traveling, and it can be helpful to think about as our role as the adult in supporting social and emotional learning. And we're the advocates for this approach, but we also need to take care of ourselves too. We know that when our tanks are running empty, that we're not able to give the best to our students and to our family members or to our coworkers and our own peers, and even our organizations as a whole. So with that in mind, we would be remiss if we didn't touch on this as the importance that self-care has in relation to SEL. So the image, like it says, helps us to understand that we have to take care of ourselves. It's like that oxygen mask on the airplane. We have to put on our own mask first. So I do encourage you, as you're wrapping up your EdPalooza wonderful experience, that you set a little goal, a mini goal for yourself to do some self-care and make that intentional time to practice being present mentally, physically, and socially, and then emotionally. So when our tanks are running low, that we can replenish so that our students don't suffer. When our fuse does become short and we end up unintentionally creating or learning environments that don't foster that social and emotional growth in our students. It's unintentional and it happens to all of us, but we can be intentional in being proactive for ourselves to make that environment for our students, whatever it looks like, foster social and emotional growth. So our final reflection here before we head into a little bit of a Q&A with the time that we have left is to share what's an SEL strategy that you can incorporate intentionally into whatever role that you're in. So if maybe it's one that we've talked about here today, the 10 times 2 or some self-care, maybe that breathing or creating opportunities for kids to connect. But what does it look like for you in your role? What's one thing that you can commit to trying? I will agree with what Shea has mentioned, working on that self-management, having a schedule, something I know that I need to continue working on. It's a helpful tool, and we have those tools in our arsenal. So if there's something that stands out to you, what might that look like? I love hearing from all of our educators on the call. Practice some more social awareness, thinking about others. It's hard to do when we have a lot going on our own. Thank you, Lily. All right. Wait for those to come in as we continue. As a reminder, these were the objectives that we went through today. We defined overall social and emotional learning. And if you want more information on the competencies themselves, I do encourage you to visit our website. We have great one-sheets that can be helpful tools. We have different strategies like the 10 times 2 that Allison just referenced on the website, and you're welcome to use those in your own context. Then we also explored what that might look like in classrooms and schools or in our families, environments and out in our community, and looked at some of those strategies, which I just saw one come in here in the chat. So encouraging students, encouraging self-care for my kids. I love that one, Cami. Thank you for sharing that. It's something we don't often teach them to have that me time. I don't have them start chores or homework immediately after school. They need time to decompress. Appreciate that you recognize that in your kids as well. Sarah mentions focusing on the whole child, not just academics. Absolutely. Taking time to listen to students and debrief as needed. Wonderful. Oh, thank you, Cameron, for sharing that. Kids of all ages can benefit from this. Wonderful. All right. We move through here. Our last section, we want to thank you very much for joining us today. We had a wonderful time on this EdPalooza session, and I do encourage you to contact us if there's more information that you would like or just an opportunity to connect. I am going to enter a survey into the chat as a best practice for the sessions that we provide, and we'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to connect with us, and otherwise, we will hope to see you on other sessions the rest of this afternoon. Thank you so much, and please enjoy the rest of your day.